Good afternoon, everyone. Very welcome to our event on engaged scholarship. Very welcome also to the people watching at home or at other places via our live stream on Zoom. Again, very welcome to this workshop. I hope you're feeling great. I'm very happy, privileged as well, that we are now able to actually physically meet here on campus, to see each other, to brainstorm with each other, and to think on questions related to engaged scholarship. And that's also what we are going to do today. We have a program with very brilliant and inspiring speakers. I'm not sure, am I good hearable for everyone here at home?
There's some background noise in the chat. You are hearable.
Well, I hope the audio on Zoom is going to be excellent and that we will improve over the next 2 hours. So today our event on engaged scholarship. As I said, we have a live stream via Zoom. The live stream is also going to be recorded, so we can maybe make a nice after movie about it. You can, for the people watching at home, you can engage with us through the Q&A via Zoom. There is, I think, a small button below your screen where you can answer or raise your questions, and then hopefully in the discussion we can answer them. Let me say something first about this workshop. A lot of people here are engaged with the Engaged Scholarship research project, which is one of the research projects that we are doing at the Refugee Academy. And the Refugee Academy, maybe it's good to say something more about it. A few of the speakers today probably are also going to relate their stories to the Refugee Academy. But it is a kind of infrastructure here that was set up by Halleh Ghorashi and Elena Ponzoni, who are also on the program for today. And they set it up in, I think it was 2016, actually to connect academia with the broader society. And it is an infrastructure not only based on activities, but moreover on relationship that we build together with the people that participate in what we are organizing. So that's a little bit about the Refugee Academy. So maybe it's good to say something about the program. Let me see if it's working. Yes. Here we have the program. My name is Kai Mars, and I will be your moderator for today. After me, Nella Geurts will say something about this workshop, why we are organizing it, what we're going to do. And then we have our panel with 3 passionate researchers who are going to say something about their experiences with engaged scholarship. Then we invite Maria Rast to say something about her research that she's doing with engaged scholars. And then we have an after talk to discuss the different experiences of engaged scholars, which is led by Fiorito and Nella Geurts. After that after talk, we have a Q&A in which you can share some of your own experiences, in which you can ask questions, in which we can engage in this discussion on engaged scholarship. So that's a Q&A. Again, for the people at home, you can raise your questions in the chat or in the Q&A function on Zoom. And then finally, Halleh Ghorashi will share her final reflections on engaged scholarship at the end of this meeting. And then we finish with the drinks for the people here what are participating in the workshop here on campus. So that's the program. Let me go back to this slide again. The Q&A, by the way, is moderated by Fabian Holle. He's also one of our PhD candidates in our research project on engaged scholarship. And actually, they've been working on a workshop series together with queer refugee artists and community organizers, etc. And recently, they've opened an exhibition, which is actually now you can visit it at Frame of Frame here in Amsterdam Post, so that you can also see in real life what engaged scholarship can lead up to. I also wanted to mention Fabian, and of course. Now I would like to give the floor to Nella Geurts, and she will say something about this workshop. Yes, Nella?
Yes, thank you, Kai. And yeah, thank you all for being here. My name is Nella Geurts. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Radboud University in Nijmegen. Before I say anything else, I would like to ask you a question. Could you please raise your hand if you see yourself as an engaged scholar? So please take a few moments if you need them. I see some don't. Perfect. And for the people at home, could you say I in the chat? So can let me know. Okay, sorry, I missed a few hands. Could you do it again? Okay, I see some hesitant faces as well. That's totally fine. How are we doing online, Fabian?
One.
One engagement out of 4.
Out of 16.
Okay.
Or 2.
Yeah.
2. Okay. Oh, perfect. Well, thank you for all of you for being here, engaged scholar or not yet, who knows. I think we're pretty happy with like drawing this wide and diverse audience because it is meant for people who already consider themselves to be engaged, but also for them who do not, perhaps want to be, or perhaps are just curious. And I would like to invite you today basically to maybe ask yourself throughout hearing the different experiences and practices of engaged scholarship today, why you did raise your hand or why you didn't, and how that relates maybe to various interpretations and practices you hear today. And perhaps with like a look into the future, whether you would like to change that or whether you're perfectly happy with how engaged you are at the moment. If I would have to ask myself that question, I think I would have raised my hand, but not yet quite confidently so, which is part of the reason why I'm very happy that this event came to be. So I got this idea for this event basically thanks to the Christine Mormont grant, which I received at the Radboud University, which is a grant that kind of wants to support and encourage female PhDs to stay and develop in academia. And I'm very happy that I got it because I think throughout my academic pathway, if you will, I was always and still am interested in methods, how we use them, how we can combine them, but also how we as a researcher kind of relate to the methods we use and how we use them. And I think in part that's kind of was brought about by having a lot of late night after talks with my roommate back in the day who got taught qualitative methods while I was getting taught quantitative methods. And in part, I think also just me personally and as a scholar being interested in people and the stories of people. And then when I got taught that the quantitative methods, I always was wondering about the stories behind the numbers I got. And I think one of the final triggers for me that made me realize, okay, I need to know more about what this engaged scholarship thing is and how can I be one, was that I put out some animation videos based on a publication, part of my dissertation. And in there, I interviewed high-skilled migrants from Turkey and studied how their sense of belonging to the Netherlands was experienced or a lack thereof. And the response I got from those videos were quite massive for me. So I got various messages via LinkedIn and Twitter via all kinds of people who I didn't know, so who were really resonating with the stories and conclusions of the research, which really made me eager and kind of gave me this urge to do something more with that and engage with them in various ways, but I didn't really know how. So that's when I came across the Refugee Academy and the narrative of change project, and that was basically the foundation for the proposal I wrote for that Mormon grant. So I'm happy to see that various of you people and are also interested and curious about the concept. What is it exactly, and how do we become engaged if we want to be in various ways, perhaps? So as Kai said, we're really happy that we have so many speakers today among us who also came to Amsterdam, for which we're really grateful. And I'll introduce each of them, but I'll start with the first speaker, and afterwards I'll introduce the next one. And maybe just a little disclaimer, I of course did some digging online to get all the scoops on our speakers. And for each of them, I found a quote which to me illustrated or told me like, okay, yes, these are engaged scholars. So yeah, maybe you can watch out for them in my introduction. So that being said, our first speaker is Niels Spierings, who is an associate professor at the Department of Sociology at the Radboud University in Nijmegen. His research centers around in and exclusion on the grounds of Islam, migration background, gender, and sexuality. And I think those interests are very nicely combined in his recently awarded Vrije grant, which focuses on the socio-political inclusion of Muslims in Western Europe. He's very active on Twitter, on which he shares his statements like, I could research 3 million things, but choose to study those that are close to my heart. Translation is my own, by the way. And in 2020, he received the Radboud Science Award, in which he translated research results into teaching materials for primary education students, which to me was just one of the many things that can be considered a very engaged scholar thing to do. So please, Niels, we're looking forward.
Thank you, Nella, for the kind words and reminding me of not putting too much on Twitter. But I'm quite glad you took that quote. Yeah, so I was asked to talk about my passion as an engaged scholar for about 10 minutes. Am I? That's basically the question you already asked, and I was one of the people who said like, yeah, I think so. Am I? I'm not affiliated to Halleh's and Elena's project that Kai mentioned, so I actually have no clue what the exact definition is that they have for being an engaged scholar. So I had to make up one of my, I could have Googled it, but I thought it was more fun to think about it myself. And then there was several options. One was, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to talk for 10 minutes about my passion, and it will probably turn into a rant of about 10 minutes on something completely else. So let's not do that, but let's the scholarship side of me take over and sort of do this more or less systematically. So that's why I pulled the whiteboard in. I'm going to write a bit on the whiteboard first. So basically, I will do it on mic for the room later on. Basically, A engages B on C in D, performing E. That's the summary of what I'm going to talk about. So A engages, B on C in D, performing E. Making it a bit more sensible, scholar A engages with society B on research theme C in academic and societal context D, performing research related activities E. So I'm trying to do in probably the 7 or 8 minutes I have left, the ABC of an engaged scholarship, claiming that I do know what I'm talking about. A, scholar. In this case, that's me. But I'm more than that scholar. The scholar is the person, the part of me that's being paid for doing research, basically. But of course, I'm also a human being. So that scholar is a person. And me, together with my directors and NWO and some other grant officers, determine what I study. Because actually, and it's really nice, Nella, that you took that quote from Twitter, I could study many different things, but I make the decision which topics I find important enough to put my time and effort in. And others decide whether they want to pay me for that. It's also me that, or you, it's not just about me, it's also me and the experiences I have that I bring in terms of my understanding of what I study, the perspectives I bring along, the theories that I come up with, the ideas I have. And that's me as a person, the position I have in society, but it's also me, what series on television I watch, which books I read, that all bring sort of new ideas that pop up at different moments doing research. For instance, the formula with the ABCDE, I came up with that because last week we had a conference in Frankfurt on political trust, and somebody did a formula on political trust with A, B, C, and D. And I thought, okay, I'm going to add a letter to really do something more than that. But that's the same, I think, with research. So what I've read yesterday will probably influence what I think tomorrow. Just to say, A, the scholar me is not just the scholar me. The scholar me is the person me who finds certain things more important than others and who brings a certain perspective. And that scholar engages with society. And society to me is, I don't know, journalists, the general public, policy makers, the people whom my research is about, interest groups, my family, my PhDs, not my, as in they are not their owner, the PhDs I've worked with, my colleagues, and basically it's all of the above. Like this is all different facets, elements of society I engage with and where I hope I can make a difference. And each of them brings their own questions and their own interests. A policymaker wants to know whether the policy works. A journalist wants to have a juicy quote. And PhDs want some advice on how to do the research and many other things. So there's many different ways I engage with many different parts of society, basically. And this sort of leads up to one of the conclusions, I think, of what I've tried to say, like there are many different ways in which you actually can be an engaged scholar. And we do that on a certain research theme, C. In my case, many things linked to inclusion and exclusion. Islam, can be right-wing populism, can be gender equality, can be social media, can be sexuality, can be migration, can be probably skipping some stuff of the themes I'm working, political participation. Why these topics? This is what interests me. This is what I find important. These are the themes, at least in my view, that we often talk about in such simplistic and or dogmatic ways that I think there needs to be done research on that. We need to think this through. We need to have new perspectives. So these are the themes that I'm not happy about, how both in society and in academia are talked about, and we lack proper knowledge. Which basically brings me to D in the context of the current society and current academia. And on the one hand, we have all the different actors I engage with, that is society, with all the different questions and the different motivations are already said. Like journalists are looking for something else than a policymaker. Talking about your research on Twitter, great example, that's the context as well. Well, it's not for the faint-hearted, I think, because like there's a lot of shit going on Twitter when you say something about Islam, and it doesn't matter what I say because I make somebody angry. It's either that side or debate, or often both. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you have to be prepared. I even made it at some point into a meme. I think that's sort of like, yay, I'm my own meme now, but it wasn't like a very flatterous one. So different contexts in which we work, and to me it's important to sort of realize that, okay, what is the context of this particular activity? What do they want? Do I want to give that to them? So policy advice, do you want to know whether the program works, is effective? Or do you want me to say that the program is effective? I'm not doing the second. I'm happy to do the first. And I'm well aware of the fact that at some point I can write down what I want and policymakers will sort of interpret the conclusion in their own way, sometimes beyond what can be interpreted from what I wrote, I think. But that is the context I need to sort of think of. These are all kinds of different challenges. These are all kinds of different contributions as well. So helping to make more effective policies, make people think about how they think about social media. It's all bad. Well, actually, it's not. Surprise that. Make journalists, and for instance, people who are being trained as a journalist also realize that they have a responsibility as the guard dogs of democracy. They are not just like neoliberal pawns that need to make money for a newspaper. And I have no illusion that that 5-minute interview I have on Zoom will change their mind in a substantive way, but I hope more people do things like that. This is all societal context. And I also mentioned academic context. And academic context is also about, is it rewarded? Is it rewarded to be an engaged scholar? I'm not sure. There's trade-offs. There's only so much time I have. I otherwise get into fights with my partner. I do need to walk the dogs. I can't do 168 hours a week doing research and engaging with I don't know what. So sometimes it's rewarded, sometimes it's not, but in the end it's a question, what do I get from it? Not in the most instrumental way, like I need to make money out of this because, well, then I shouldn't be an academic. But what do I get from it? And that brings me to E. Performing research-related activities. I already mentioned quite a number. I have no clue how I am on time. I have 2 more minutes, okay. I think Nella mentioned this, and it's sort of running, I hope, as a thread throughout what I just talked about. There's so many different activities, and I like many of them, but I don't think that everyone needs to like most of them actually. Big ones that fit you as a researcher, that the ways you want to contribute. Is it writing blogs, which is a great way to reach journalists and the general audience? Is it to work on a program for primary school children on how to think about the influence Islam has on our personal lives, which was a great experience. But at the same time, we had to sort of kind of fight for that because the first year we tried, and I didn't win the prize, the teachers were actually afraid to talk about this topic on primary school. Whereas the second year, when we actually got the opportunity to develop this program, one of the things we got from the pupils was that they were so happy that there was finally some positive, like nuance, neutral, if that's possible, attention for what Islam means to them, like the pupils that were identifying as Muslims themselves. So that's a great way of doing that. Another way, and then I'll skip a lot from my list, is this is purely promotional. Teaching and doing quantitative intersectionality research course as a summer course later this year in June, for which policymakers are welcome as well. So please, policymakers, come to the course as well to gain knowledge. Many different options, and you have to sort of select time-wise. So that leads me to the final like 30 seconds, because I did the A, B, C, and D. But in the end, why the F would you do this? To me, it's about like meeting people, exploring new ideas. You don't get something from each and every activity you do. You have like a zillion cups of coffee with a zillion different people, and many lead to nothing, but still you had a wonderful conversation with someone, you learned new stuff, you got new ideas, and it's sort of that collection of doing these different things, and some pay off and some don't, but actually they do, because they give you inspiration, they give you ideas, and maybe that's in the end sort of the passion I was supposed to actually get across. I do think you have to make decisions what you can and cannot do time-wise, but you will get something from it at some point. But be aware why, what you want to do, with whom, in what context, etc., etc. So that's why I sort of gave you the formula to think about where your A, B, C, D, and E is, because the F is very clear, because we should do this. That was my passionate ending.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Niels. That was great. I'm looking forward also to discuss later. Next up is Valentina Mazzucato, Professor of Globalization and Development at Maastricht University, where she also directs the research program on globalization, transnationalism, and development. In 2017, she received an ERC consolidated grant for the Motrail project, which studies the relation between migration and young people's life chances in the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, and Ghana. Which, amongst many insights, I believe, also resulted in a book which I found quite beautiful, of Finding Your Voice, which presented basically a collection of written stories that were brought about by the workshop with the same name. And in that storytelling workshop, basically aimed to equip young people with storytelling skills to tell their stories in their own voice. And in the preface of that book, which Valentina wrote, the following line left an impression on me. I was so pleased to have been a part of this, and even more sure of how academia can work hand in hand with creatives to make this world a better, happier place for all. So, looking forward to it, Valentina.
Yeah, it's good. Thank you, Nella. I was curious to see what quote you would find of me, because I'm not on Twitter. I'm not on Facebook. I am on Instagram. I have 33 followers, and they're all under the age of 33. That's mainly family and nephews and nieces. So amazing that you found a quote. Well done. So thank you for inviting me, Halleh, Nella, to this really exciting workshop. I'm really looking forward to the discussion afterwards. And I was also a little bit like Niels, wondering, do they know what they're doing by inviting me? I mean, am I an engaged scholar? I've never used the term engaged scholarship. And in fact, I did look it up, Niels. But I had a little bit of an advantage because I'm writing a chapter in a book where Halleh and Elena are also writing about engaged scholarship. They are, I'm not. Reading up on it, I did feel that I could relate a lot, especially to the aims of engaged scholarship. So I think that what I'm going to talk about today is more reflecting on what I've done and seeing, okay, could that be engaged scholarship? So it's a more reflective rather than a passionate speech. It's a reflective speech. But for me, basically, so I'm going to go through the 3 questions that the organizers asked us to talk about. And for me, what is engaged scholarship? Well, reflecting on what I was doing, it's basically a way of interacting with my research participants. That's for me, number 1. So as Niels said, you could, engage in different ways with different stakeholders. But for me, the central core is how to engage with the people that I am conducting research with. And it's also to bring in different voices, right? To facilitate that their voices also be heard in places where their voices usually are not heard. It's not to say that their voices aren't usually heard, but in certain places they just aren't. So it's about bringing voices, a plurality of voices, to a broader public. And the aim that I see of engaged scholarship is, one, is to deframe So to talk about things that are talked about very often in society with a whole bunch of assumptions and without really inquiring about or from the people that are being talked about. And so it's about deframing, but it's also about reframing. So about finding new narratives, and these new narratives come from this plurality of voices, which I think can also help to empower people. It can help a diversity of stakeholders become more aware of a diversity of ways of looking at things. And it's, to me, ultimately, a way of promoting dialogue, creative dialogue. So that's what I'm focusing on. And here I use David Bohm, who's actually a physicist, but who spent a large part of his later life thinking about what does it mean to have a dialogue. And he talks about communication that can really lead to the creation of something new, only if people are able freely to listen to each other. So listen without prejudice and without trying to influence each other. So this is, to me, what engaged scholarship is actually about. It's about fostering this kind of communication. So premise is that I don't think that any one method is the way to go. Also, in terms of academic methods, research methods, I think you can be a quantitative scholar. I think you can be a qualitative scholar. It's not about the methods. It's actually about a predisposition that you have as a person, as a researcher. So it's much more about how you are, predisposition, the way you go into a research project, more than what methods you use. And here maybe I differ from some of the people in the audience, so that would be good, then we can have a discussion. And I'm going to just focus on, because one of the questions was, how do you practice then your engaged scholarship? And I'm going to focus on, I've done a lot of things that might be able to be categorized as engaged scholarship, but I'll focus on the last two more recent ones, and it's where I do engage, as Nella said, with the arts. So creatives, and again, it's mainly working with creatives and with research participants. And my research is mainly on migration. So I mainly study migrants, and maybe what is different from some of the refugee work that maybe Halleh and you are doing is that people that I engage with don't necessarily have the papers to be able to be in this country. Whereas sometimes most refugees, are given the status, so they do. So that might be a difference that we might want to talk about. How do you engage and how do you bring about voices when the context is so hostile? That is, it's telling people you are not welcome here and we don't want you here. So that's one of the challenges that I face. But right, so the first one is a theater production that we did, engaging with to engage with a diverse public. And here it was to bring actually research results from a research project to a broader public. And it had to do with transnational families, and when children are staying in the origin countries, and the countries we studied were different African countries, and when their parents migrate to Europe, but are not able to migrate with their children. So what we did was we actually gave the research results to a theater performer who, a Ghanaian troupe, a theater troupe. And we asked her, please come up with a play that could communicate to a broader public. And the broader public is, in my view, I had in mind the people who had spent so much time on my research project. And these are people who usually are not easy to convince to come to a conference, for example. But we did this, and many actually from the community came, and they watched this play. Here are some images of the actors who are acting out our results. And then what was really interesting, though, and we used also not only the local artists, but filmmakers, etc. What was interesting is that then we had a panel discussion, and there it was a transnational panel discussion. So we had this gentleman from the Department of Immigration Service of Ghana. In the center, we had the head of the Department of Terug and Vertrek. I think Terug here and Vertrek. So these are the people who basically deport migrants. And then we had representatives from the community themselves. And then, people actually dared in the audience, they actually dared to stand up and dared to engage with people who are very placed high up in policy circles. Then we had these circular lunch tables where people were, like this is the head of the Day and Bay, the guy who's responsible for the deportation, talking with people around the table, and not all of them had actual papers to be in the Netherlands. All the while, this was surrounded by pictures taken by photographers, as well as the stories of children who were collected by the researchers. So what did this all do? First of all, it had a lot of ripple effects. The theater company performed this play many times to the Ghanaian community in Amsterdam Southeast. They also used it as input for Ghanaian talk shows and television and radio. So it helped to raise awareness, and also it helped to deframe the way transnational families are talked about, but also in the community, from something that is just about disempowerment to something that is actually can be used as a strength, but importantly is how can it become a strength. Secondly, we did the Finding Your Voice workshop, which Nella talked about, and this was a workshop that I did together and designed together with my PhDs and postdocs on this project. So Gladys Uncle Bray, and Sarah Anschutz, Laura Ogden, Onalia Osei, and Johan van Geel. And in this, we work with young people who have a migration background, and to teach them to learn creative writing skills, interviewing skills, podcasts. It was a 3-day workshop, and we were together for 3 days, working together under the guidance of a Ghanaian author who helped us, and the researchers were part of the workshop, just like the participants. And it was in a castle, and I'd like to emphasize this because the built environment is also super important. One participant said, "Why did you spend so much money on a castle?" And I said, "Well, because I think you're worth it." And she just thought about it. She said, "Yeah, I guess you're right," she said. So we worked together for 3 full days, shared our stories, read them to each other, gave each other feedback. And in the end, what did this do? Well, first of all, it created role models for these kids who don't usually have role models in the context where they're in Europe. It helps to reframe their own histories from a deficiency discourse, which is very much used in schools, to a strengths discourse. It was very empowering, as they said so themselves. One of the participants actually started her own podcast, which is still going on today, so after 2 years. And at the end, we asked them, write just one word that for you symbolizes what this workshop meant, and what does this word mean? So one was coming out. I chose that word because being here has made me freely speak up and not feel alone. I feel comfortable about myself, and I find my past beautiful, and then I can't see anything because
Learning
and then
experience.
what? Sorry.
A beautiful learning experience.
Thank you. A beautiful learning experience. The other one was vulnerable. Everybody was very vulnerable and honest. I like to see vulnerability as strength, and that is how I view everyone in this room. Going back to my memories has made me realize how consumed I sometimes get by everyday life, not thinking about all the precious memories I have.
It inspired me to write again. It inspired me in general, and it made me realize that everyone has a story.
That everyone has a story, exactly. So indeed, and so just to end on the challenges and the opportunities, I'm just going to mention a couple. The challenges, I think one is what Niels mentioned, time. All of this, the things that worked in these 2 examples that I gave you worked precisely because these people had been working with the PhDs and postdocs of the project over 2 years. They had gained trust. They trusted us, we trusted them. So we could start these workshops and the theater with a running start, if you will. It wasn't just random people pulled together for 3 days. And the question is, do we have this time? As academics, and as Niels also said, how much time do we want and can invest in these kinds of activities? We should not be naive about it. It does take a lot of time. Secondly, receptiveness. You know, the efficacy of these things and how well they are received. Now, I think the receptiveness was quite high, for example, this last example, from the students themselves. We also received quite high receptiveness from teachers in schools with a high population of migrant background kids. But for example, we have, I would say, zero receptiveness from policymakers in this case. They're just not interested. So receptiveness is a real issue. Thirdly, the manipulation of stories, I think, is one that Niels also alluded to. I mean, you can do these beautiful things, you can make these beautiful books, you can write up these beautiful stories, you can bring the voices out, you can empower the research participants. But the question is then, how do the people who read the book or listen to the stories, what do they get out of it? And well, I can tell you that the guy from the Department of Deportation really did not get anything. He actually said something about what he got out of the workshop, which was very, very, I don't know, how can you say, very disappointing. But there are lots of opportunities. So if you are thinking about this, and now I'm really, I think I'm past my time, but 3 things. First of all, I think counteracting dominant discourses is one of the biggest opportunities that I think these things give to us. And it's not something that many people in society have the freedom to do. And I think we as academics and as engaged scholars, we do have that room. And so I find that extremely energizing. And really, even if it's just, you know, even if it's that one girl who has that AfriTalk podcast, you know, I just get so energized by it. And some people say, yes, but it's just one girl. Can you really talk about, you know, having had an impact? Well, that depends what kind of, you know, how do you define impact, and how do you measure impact as well? Second really big thing is empathic spaces. It creates empathic spaces. What I mean by this is they're transformative spaces. Every single one of these experiences has transformed me as a person, as a researcher, and I believe has also transformed the participants. And this is also something that you gain a lot of energy, and hopefully you might have also the luck that you transform some institutions or in some small way. And finally, yes, well, as this participant said, you know, everyone has a story. So of course I end with Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who talks about the danger of one story, right? And a lot of this engaged scholarship is precisely about bringing out more stories. Everyone has more than just one story. And so it's not, as she says, the single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. So engaged scholarship for me is to bring out more stories. Thank you.
So much, Valentina. That was great. Next up is our final passionate speaker. I'm sure there will be plenty other passionate speakers. But the speaker, Elena Ponzoni, she's an assistant professor at the Department of Sociology at Vrije, Amsterdam. She's the coordinator of the Refugee Academy, which she launched together with Halleh Ghorashi. And in her research, she connects various fields, so the fields of diversity and inclusion, with the philosophy of language, as well as the sociology of science. She's also involved as a postdoc in the Engaged Scholarship and Narrative Exchange project, where one of her personal hopes is, and I quote, "The processes of reflection, knowledge production, and learning together that we initiate can lead to actual improvement of the lives of refugees in the Netherlands." I will also put on the slides for you.
Yes, thank you, Nella. Thank you, Kai, for organizing this, and all you for coming. I'm very happy with this workshop, and also very happy with the passionate speeches before me. Thank you very much. And yeah, especially the speech Valentina just gave, I have the feeling you already mentioned so many aspects that I find really important when talking about engaged scholarship. That I'm afraid there will be some repetition, but it's also nice because I want to start a bit in an abstract way, actually, to give you a definition of what I understand under engaged scholarship. And I think thanks to the examples that you brought in, it's already very much easier to imagine also what I mean. But I'm also happy to see that we have so many commonalities. So, and I also really liked what Niels brought in, but we're going to talk about the relations during the panel. Yeah, for me, engaged scholarship has been a journey, actually. I'm trying to understand my role as a scholar in societies from when I started as a young researcher. But I wanted to start, as I said, by giving a kind of definition of what I mean with engaged scholarship, also very much inspired by the discussions we have in the engaged scholarship project and by the work of my colleagues. And then I will tell a story that makes more concrete I hope why it's important and also why it is challenging. So I would say engaged scholarship is a way to create meaningful dialogue, as also Valentina mentioned, and exchange between different types of knowledges, bringing together academic, intimate, personal, experiential knowledge and professional knowledge, and between people that have different positions in society, with attention to many things, but in any case, these four. The way that academic discourse can reproduce or challenge structures of inequality. So already Valentina mentioned the dominant discourses and discursive structures in society. Who is producing knowledge and what is their role and position? And the type of relation between researchers and non-researchers, participants in research and people research are about, which should be collaborative, non-extractive, so not going to the field, extracting information and then leaving it, no, but we try to create reciprocal relations which bring something to each other, and power sensitive, of course. And of course, also attention to the transformative potential of the knowledge that you produce, with also attention to access to different audiences, as was already mentioned also by Niels, for instance, at all the different places and audiences where the knowledge produced can make a difference. I'm not claiming we do that in all the researchers that we do in the Literature and Refugee Academy team, but this is the ideal I have for engaged scholarship. So it means really having an attention on these reciprocal relations, which are both personally and professionally meaningful to the people involved, so researchers and non-researchers participating in this process, and meaningful in the terms, as said, of the knowledge products they deliver in society. So, having said that, one of my first experiences as a researcher, when I was a young researcher, I was doing research in a multidisciplinary team, doing research in the social domain in the Netherlands, was in the youth domain about parenting support and youth care. And this research was very much meant to be meaningful for practice. So we're a lot engaging in communities and with organizations, and also discussing a lot in this research group what was our role as researchers. And my former supervisor at that time once said to me, you know, when you interact in the social fabric, what people expect from us is that we bring order in the chaos. And that expression of him has been puzzling me a lot, and it puzzled me at that time, and it keeps on actually puzzling me today, because what does it mean if we do assume that that is a role of the academy, bring order in the chaos, bring in conceptual order, for instance, what kind of order are we actually bringing? Because at that time, what I was seeing around me was the research that we're doing was sound research, and also very much based on the idea that it should be a timely and effectively produced research that could provide answers to practitioners, to professionals that have to solve all kinds of problems in the youth domain. But at the same time, researchers were very much reproducing certain categories that were very much based on the idea of weaknesses of certain groups in that research, so that these weaknesses could then be tackled. But in that way, these categories were also problematic because we were actually somehow contributing to reducing people and groups of people to problems, as often happens with the best intention in this kind of research. So I've come to see the statement of the role of academia to bring order in the chaos as a bit problematic, especially when it is coupled with quickness, quick research, quick ordering, and with the idea of the researcher as the sole architect of that order, the sole creator of that order. Because there are many examples in history of research that produced and reproduced orders that were not resonating with the experiences of people. I think women or migrant communities, and in that way fixed and reproduced without wanting, actually, reproduced inequalities. And in the recent context, for instance, we can think about doing research about third-generation migrants, for instance, and using the idea of third-generation migrants when we're talking about people that maybe do not identify as migrants at all. As Clara brought this very nice example, to picture ourselves what it might mean. So we have to realize that as researchers, we are part of society where there are dominant ideas and ways of thinking that might reproduce exclusion and inequality even when we don't want to. And sometimes it's very hard to escape that as researchers. And I believe in many contexts, it's not enough to say, I am reflective about the kind of questions I pose, the kind of concepts I use, because you are part of a system of thought and you have a certain position, a certain history in that system. So I think what we have to do is to immerse ourselves in different kinds of relations and to create type of exchanges between different kinds of knowledges, experiences and narratives and different kinds of positions, so that you have this polyvocality that Valentina already talked so beautifully about. And to have this polyvocality, I think you need to invest in relationality. So you really need to invest in types of relations where it becomes possible to listen to each other in a different way, so that we build together alternative forms of knowledge, and we can tell other stories actually about reality. And there, of course, comes a challenge, because that is very often building these relations can be a very messy process. It is very hard to structure, very time consuming, it was already mentioned, and not easily structurable and controllable. And there are many different ways to do that. You can do that with all kinds of methods. In the Vrije project, we see all kinds of examples of that. And I've tried to do that also in different ways in many research experiences up to now. I will just mention one example, because with time I only can go into one. And that is one recent example that we did with the Refugee Academy team, the project Learning Crossroads for Refugee Inclusion, where we engaged with community initiatives and civic initiatives for refugees in the Netherlands, for refugee inclusion. And we wanted to research the meaning of these informal organizations, of these civic initiatives in the field of refugee integration in the Netherlands. And one of the things we did, or actually the whole project was about bringing together people from these organizations and with the different activities. For instance, one masterclass in which we brought together people from these initiatives with and without refugee background. And we shared experiences on what it means to create an inclusive space within an organization like that. So we gave a lot of spaces to stories and discussions and experiences, but we also brought in our own perspectives and analysis and understanding and knowledge as researchers. So it was a very reciprocal process. We also read academic texts together, philosophical texts, which were sometimes quite abstract. So it's, you know, it doesn't land with every participant in the same way, but it was very, yeah, what I want to stress is that we were also bringing something in as researchers in that process. And what we did, we co-created a collective story of the social initiatives, of what was their exceptional value in the broader fields of refugee inclusion, also in relation to formal actors in the Netherlands, and in relation to each other. We talked a lot in these sessions about giving shape to inclusion as a process of becoming, as a dynamic process, something that changes continuously. And that to be inclusive, you also need to give some space to chaos, to come back to my tension between chaos and order. That was also a very important theme there, because we read these philosophical texts that were saying, actually, you know, you need just a little bit of order, actually, yeah, but embracing chaos can be a very important vehicle to be more inclusive. So there was, for instance, one of these participants that said, yeah, I always thought of myself as too chaotic, but now actually through this process, to this research process, I see also the creative and productive characters actually of this being chaotic, and why that really makes the difference of what I can bring into the field. So exactly the, you know, more improvising, more creative and relational ways of working within these organizations, which are often seen as weaknesses, also from the perspective of the formal system of integration, appear to be extremely valuable to think about how to shape inclusive spaces. So important in all this is that we made an effort really to learn from each other very much in this process. And I can only, I think, talk about one challenge. There are, of course, many challenges in the process like that. But one challenge, I think, very important one is creating a balance between what we call decentering yourself as a research and recentering yourself. So create a space that invites other people to step in and share experiences and surprise you somehow. So create an empty space. But you also then need to step back in and bring in, as said, your own contribution and your conceptual instruments as a researcher that can be used to build a rooted understanding of experiences. And that is a process that you do together, in which is very important to be sensitive to moments that resonate and moments in which you have to rethink also your own frame as a researcher. For instance, we were very much thinking that these stories that these initiatives would bring would be an alternative to the formal approach, to the approach of formal institutions. But in this process, actually later in this process, we realized that actually they were seeing it much more as complementary. So we changed how we talked about it. And this actually this building this relation, this relationality, I think works. I'm finished. I think last thing I want to say. I think it works through a process that develops in time, and where you try to stay connected in different phases and through different kind of exchanges. For instance, in this process, we first did an intensive masterclass with a group of initiatives, which we went very deep, very much zooming in. Then we came up with this collective story, and we involved again these initiatives later, but also other initiatives in the Netherlands to reflect on what came out actually of this process. So it was a kind of reframing. We followed also a bit how this story landed, how different web networks were using it. We reflected through a session later about the impacts of the story, how you can make impact in different audiences with a story like that. So this relationality, develops through time and through different phases and cycles in which you frame and reframe together, and which you learn actually, you learn to co-create and you learn to feed each other. That is the, also one important challenge is to bring it with you through time. This I think I want to finish this.
Thank you again. Sorry. Thank you, Elena, about telling us something about embracing chaos, valuing chaos, inviting chaos in the process of engaging as a researcher. Also, thank you, Niels, about letting us think, making us think about the ABCs of engaged scholarship. And also thank you, Valentina, about telling us how you engage with the arts and with artistic practices in doing engaged research. It was very inspiring to me, at least, and I hope it was also very inspiring to you. So again, give a big applause for our. We'll put this slide back on again. Yes, great. I'm really looking forward to the discussion, but first I would like to invite Maria to say something about your research. You're working with engaged scholars, so we'd really like to give the floor to you. Maria is one of our PhD candidates in our project on engaged scholarship. She has a master's degree in law from University of Bern, if I'm not mistaken, and a master's degree in sociology here at the Vrije Universiteit. And her research focused on the challenges and the opportunities for promoting refugee inclusion through practices of engaged scholarship. So I would like to give the mic to you and give a big hand for Maria.
Thank you, Kai. I'll try to keep track of time. As Kai mentioned, my PhD research is on the challenges and opportunities of engaged scholarship around refugee inclusion in the Netherlands. And actually, so many things that were said today really relate to the stories that I collected. But before going into this, I thought it's good to first tell you something about the research itself. So we focus especially on engaged research in particular. I will say something about it later because there are many ways in which you can engage, and research is one of them. And so we spread a call in our networks and asking scholars that identified as engaged and researched refugees to respond and fill in a short form. And we got 92 responses. And out of these responses, we then selected 23 scholars to interview. And we were focusing mostly on researchers focusing on power issues, and that were trying to change these power issues or work towards more inclusive or just societies through their research. So that actually also means that this focus on refugee justice and on power meant that actually many of the people I spoke to were inspired by critical theory, and they saw their research also sort of political, so they were not impartial and objective. And I guess you can imagine that most of the researchers took qualitative approaches that I spoke to, and there were some that took mixed methods, but most of them were qualitative. But I think Valentina mentioned it, that it's maybe not so much about the methods, but about the way we engage. So I think the findings of the research might also apply to all kinds of researchers. And I must say that during the research, our team and I myself, we started focusing more and more on co-creative approaches in which scholars not only reflect on power in society, but also power during knowledge production, and that they try to reflect on them and try to co-create knowledge together with refugees. And many of them actually also took artistic or arts-based research approaches, like Valentina and also Fabian's research. But so today I try to take my focus a bit out of this co-creation or engagement in terms of co-creation, and I try to also reflect a bit on the other stories that I collected. And as I said, so engagement is actually also broader than research. And I'm very happy about Niels' introduction, because he already mentioned these different areas where you actually can engage. And I think Valentina also mentioned, and actually Niels as well, that so engaged scholarship is a pretty vague term. So it really also depends on where you engage. So in terms to make it more tangible, I think we really need to think about where we engage and where we do so. So you can engage through teaching by, for example, seeing the classroom as engagement itself, or by seeing stimulating engagement of students with society, or inviting societal partners into your classroom. You can also engage via academic services, so advising policymakers or organizations or societal partners. And you can engage through research, which we are mostly talking about today. And I think most of the times we understand engaged research as community engaged research with specific communities, but we also heard today, of course, that it can be broader than only a community. You can invite several societal partners. What actually wasn't really mentioned today is that in my interviews, I also realized that many scholars that saw themselves as engaged scholars also understood this engagement as a responsibility to change academia itself, to, for example, open up university structures to refugees themselves, as Fiorito has done. Maybe you can tell me more about it later. Or by making university structures more inclusive, diversifying the staff, for example, or decolonize the university, changing the curriculum, or simply changing academic climate, because it's not always that inclusive. So many of the respondents, and I think many of the people that spoke today, actually also understand engagement as changing university structures. And of course, many also engaged in their private lives. So many already mentioned today that they actually also have to do a lot in their free time, because engagement takes a lot, a lot of effort and time. But like even in next to their academic engagement, a lot of engaged scholars do, for example, volunteer work. So this is also something that came out of the research. And I think also the important to mention that is that actually these areas like teaching, service, and research are not strictly divided. So many scholars that see themselves as engaged, they really try to, take away these boundaries, and they let their research results inform the classroom, for example, and their services. And then again, the classroom and the societal partnerships also inform their research. So I only have a small time left. So what actually also came of the research, and we heard a little bit about it today, but so there are different areas where you can engage, but there are also different ways in which you can engage. And there is something which I call today, which I call critical engagement. So you can bring critique to society. You can use your research to critique certain structures, or you can stimulate reflection amongst your students, or you can do so in a co-creative way, in a democratic way. So you can teach, for example, by establishing a classroom in which everyone learns from each other, and also inviting societal partners. Yeah, like Niels Summer School, for example. Then you can also do your services like in a critical way, bringing critique and doing simply advising communities, or you can establish mutually empowering and beneficial partnerships like Elena, for example, mentioned with the workshop that they did. And finally, also research. You can do research in a critical way, do your research and then spread the results, or you can do so in a co-creative way, in which everyone learns. And yeah, also, of course, Elena and Valentina were talking about also power issues in their own research. So then I have 2 minutes left to quickly go into challenges that I think apply to all kinds of researchers, not necessarily only to critically engaged or democratically engaged, because I think it's not necessarily the case that one is better than the other, but that these researchers actually have different aims and also different challenges that then come with these different aims and approaches. But what actually came out of the interviews and also from today is that I think many engaged researchers struggle somehow with the marginalized position of engaged research, because engagement is not always rewarded. So it is sort of appreciated within universities, but it's not rewarded. So many scholars engage in their free time, and actually academic pressures like publication pressure, funding pressure, and also teaching load can stand in the way of engagement, and engagement can also stand in the way of your academic career, because it is appreciated but not necessarily rewarded. Then what also many struggle with is that when engaging with societal partners, policymakers, but also organizations, it is sometimes difficult to unsettle these societal partners' assumptions. Actually, all of the scholars mentioned this today. And these partners might actually also struggle to really commit to the things. Like even if their assumptions are changed, they might struggle to then bring these into their organizations. But my time is up. So they might struggle to implement these in their organizations. There might also be political opponents or opponents within their organizations. So like even if they wanted to incorporate solutions, it's not always that simple. And it also takes a long time often, even if solutions are then implemented, it takes a really long time to actually achieve societal change. And one final challenge that was also mentioned was the struggle with media, for example, that that media often has a certain story that they want to tell. They might want to talk to you, but actually they won't really change their opinion based on what you tell them, but they will simply publish their story and sort of change your words so that it fits their story. But I think I would like to end on a positive note. And these are what we heard in all stories today, actually, that, and also all the scholars I spoke to, that all these scholars were actually really passionate, and that indeed, I mean, you might change the lives of the people that you engage with, but actually your life is changed as well as an engaged scholar. And so most of the people, even though they were frustrated with challenges and they were struggling in their daily lives, they wanted to keep on engaging because it is really rewarding for yourself. And I think this connects again to Niels' heart, engaging with what touches your heart. So yeah, I think that is the reason why you should keep engaging.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you for your very inspiring talk again about your research with engaged scholars. And I can assume that many of you are very interested to read more about research findings, etc. For the Engaged Scholarship Project, we have our own website, maybe it's good to mention still. It's engaged scholarship and narrativesofchange.org. And there you can already find some of the publications. And in the coming period, there will be more publications as well. But we also have our own podcast on engaged scholarship, and on the website you can listen to some of the episodes, and you can also find blogs. We have our engaged vocabularies, where you can read more actually about the different terms, the terminology that we're working with, etc. So if you're interested, I would really should suggest, of course, to visit our website. But now the discussion, I think we've all been looking very much forward to it. And I would like to invite the passionate speakers again to come to the floor. But first, I would also like to invite Fiorito and Nella Geurts back again. They are going to lead the discussion. Nella, you've seen already, but Tada not yet. So also like to introduce Tada. Tada is also associate assistant professor in our department of sociology here at Vrije Universiteit. And for her PhD dissertation, she's been doing research with undocumented youth, Latinx youth in Los Angeles. And right now she is working very hard to make the academic institutions here in the Netherlands more inclusive to undocumented youth as well. So I would like to give the floor to you again and lead the discussion. And for the passionate speakers, I would also like to invite you to come to the floor. Maybe we can arrange a little panel here in the meantime before starting the discussion. So the floor is yours.
I think we're going to try without mic. So, but if people online need us to use the mic, then please let us know in the chat. So then Fabian will give us a sign. Okay, thank you so much for all the talks. We've prepared all these kinds of questions. I don't know if you have the same, but now all these new questions are coming up. But I try to put to my script as far as possible. But maybe what I'm most curious about is my first question, which is about methods, which we've all said stuff about. So Valentina, you know, like, it's not really about the methods, and also Maria, you said it's not really about methods, but maybe more about the way we engage. But I wonder whether the methods we use or are used to using don't shape the way we engage. So I'm wondering how you view and also practice engaged scholarship, whether that is founded on and also shaped by and maybe even limited by like the methods we get taught in our bachelor or like lifelong learning, you know, like throughout or academic journey. So whether those methods shape how you view and practice engaged scholarship as well. Sure, maybe Valentina, she said, with respect to it's not necessarily about the method, would be curious to hear your.
Yeah, I think so. As we heard from, I think all the speakers, engaged scholarship is a variety of things. And co-creation is one, but it's not the only way to be an engaged scholar. So I think you need to think about, okay, in what way do you want to be an engaged scholar? And so just to take the example of the theater, I mean, we had some co-creative elements throughout the project, but for us, the theater play was really about how do we now bring back to the community some of the findings from this research, and how do we get them to engage in a way that empowers them, right? So not in an academic conference, and maybe not just in a sort of round table discussion, because those are our formats. So, and if in that case, it really didn't matter what our methods were to get to our results. I mean, of course, it does matter, but I mean, there weren't any methods. We did use quantitative methods as well, which actually helped us to see that there were also positive things about being in a transnational family for the children back home, for example. And it was the quantitative methods that allowed us to see this. Because if you ask a mother here about their child back in Ghana, of course the mother's going to focus on how much she misses the child and how she had hoped that her migration would be shorter, and so that she could see the child again. So you hear and you learn a lot about the emotionality of this, but it doesn't necessarily tell you how the child back home is doing. So because we did quantitative survey among school children in Ghana, we saw that actually there was no difference between the children who had parents overseas versus the children who were living with their parents in certain indicators of well-being, which we used when we had tested with the local child psychologist in Ghana that these measures that we were using made sense. Anyway, this is to make a long story short. It's also about telling parents here, look, your children maybe are not, they're not worse off because you can't go back. So yes, your situation is not ideal. And yes, this is not what you wanted, but you don't also have to live with your feelings of guilt and feelings of that you're not a good parent. But here's what we found works. So that was for us, this is what I mean by saying that, of course, in a survey, you can't, it's hard to co-create, right? Or you might be able to co-create if you give the questionnaire to people and try to think together what kinds of questions. But there's another issue that I wanted to raise that maybe is related to this co-creation, and one of the things that I struggle with is that sometimes we speak a bit too simplistically about co-creation as, oh, it's about bringing your participants' voices into the research, but sometimes your participants' voices have internalized the exact discourses that you are questioning, right? So yeah, so I just wanted to raise that as an issue, and that's why I actually really like using mixed methods, because it gives me the most freedom to both understand like emic understandings of what's in the field, but also to have that distance. I think you mentioned it, Maria, that you mentioned it. Yes, so being inside, but also stepping out and then going back in, and that is I feel our role as researchers, as engaged researchers.
Yeah. May I? Yeah, because actually hearing you talking, I was exactly thinking about the connection with the idea of the doing co-creation. In my case, I think most of my researchers are I use co-creation as a method, but that does not mean, as said, that you disappear as a researcher, and that bringing in other voices and politicality does not mean just reproducing the voices, because that is also as you said, that it means actually bringing in also something as a researcher, and in that sense, I see a lot of parallels between bringing in the insights that you got from a quantitative research that also deconstruct certain ideas and brings a different frame, or bringing in conceptual ideas from philosophical texts as we were doing, that also you do something to stir yeah, actually, yeah, I would see this adding to the chaos in another way. But for me, using qualitative methods in the type of operations we do is very important. Yeah, I'm not a quantitative scholar, so I never tried to bring in a quantitative element, although I could imagine. But it's many aspects actually of what I see as engagement in the sense of relational learning are related to qualitative methods that leave room for complexity, using this also iterative process of going back to the field, interpreting in cycles are all ideas that also come from a qualitative tradition. But I certainly, I think, but the combination would be very interesting to make.
I think you touch upon an important tension there, because as you said, like it's sort of a disposition, like you need to want, but there is a closeness, particularly if you use a somewhat more narrow definition of engaged scholarship. There's a closeness to co-creation, to qualitative methods, and I think that is also experienced sort of in the discourse about this discussion. So as many of the more quantitative scholars I know, I think wouldn't consider themselves engaged scholar because of the way that we also discuss it and because of how it's tied to, I wrote down some bits like challenging structures of inequality, collaboration with the non-researcher. And also, to me also as a scholar, my goal as a scholar is not to challenge structure of inequality. I want to understand them, and to me as an engaged scholar, I don't know what my goal is, but something like to make people think and learn and reflect based on sound logic and proper empirical observation, regardless of the outcome. Because I do think if people do that they sort of move towards less inequality in the end, but that's not the goal. So I do see a tension and sort of a discourse where some scholars might actually sort of pull back from engaged scholarship because of this discourse. And that limits us in helping society.
So are you suggesting that we should change the discourse of engaged scholars?
I don't even know what I'm. So, yeah, well, I would like to sort of like break open the terminology, because engage is a very, on the one hand, very broad term, but it's used in a very specific way.
Yeah.
And if that would mean as a consequence that scholars do not identify with that more narrow way, pull away from engaging with society,
Yeah.
yes, definitely we should break it open,
Yeah.
because then that hurts us all.
But I think then it really helps to look at these different areas of engagement and look at different approaches to engagement, because actually I think there is not one scholar that really only engages in a co-creative way, because I think most of the times you can switch between these different roles. So this also maybe gives us more space to sometimes engage in one way and sometimes in another way, and this gives more room, I think, for scholars to see themselves as engaged.
But I think that adds, like, also answers in part also my second question, which was more about whether you view engaged scholarship as like this thing that you can enable or turn on, or whether you can turn it on if you think, okay, I have this cool research question and I need to be engaged for this one, so I need co-creation and I need certain views and practices, or whether you see engaged scholarship more as something that is part of you as a person and thus as a scholar, and it's just naturally part of any research you do or its aftermath. So also I think asking from someone who is trying to become more an engagement, like, so can you can you learn to turn it on, make it part of you in that sense, do you think?
Can I? In a way, I think almost all of us, like social scientists, are one way or another engaged scholars. Why would you otherwise study like society and everything? Like you care about it. So that's the bit that's in us all, 99% kind of all. And then there's that translation to actually doing stuff, like making that manifest. And my experience is that that's far less evident. Also because often you don't know how and what you can do. And that's why I like sort of that idea of a menu and all the different things that you can do, and you do not need to do it all, and that not one is not per se better than the other. Probably we all have our ideas which one is better than the other, but there's many different pick something. But you need to have that menu, otherwise you can't pick from it. So, yeah, those thoughts.
Any additions, or I see some nodding, but
Well,
No, go ahead, go ahead.
yeah, for me, I think it's less a menu to choose of, but more really ingrained in what it means to do research, like, yeah, I think if you see engaged scholarship as using co-creative method, of course, you can see it as an instrument that you can bring in more or less in different contexts and different researchers. Not all research needs to be per se co-creative or participatory, but I would see it more as an attitude of not only of engaging in the sense of bringing your the outcomes of your research to society and see how and in what areas it can be transformative, of have an impact, but also an attitude of relational learning. For me, it's very much a path, a personal journey of growing as a researcher and learning to see from different perspectives, learning to have different types of dialogues, to listen in different ways. So in that sense, it's not something that you can turn on and off, but it's just a journey which defines at the end these relations and relational way of being define who you are, I think, as a researcher, as a person.
Would you say that is also sort of what scholars should be like? So because that's like what we do, but is that also the template for a good scholar should do that? Is that what at the macro level all scholars should do?
Yeah, it's a tricky question because I don't want to be judgmental. But for me, ideally, I would really love if that would be the template with which the academic world would develop more. But I think there are a lot of ways to do that. There are a lot of ways to be engaged, and I completely agree with what you said, Niels. That not all researchers are engaged in transformative research in the sense of challenging structural inequality, and there are different types of engagements. That's I agree with that.
Nella, I really like your questions because you're like this young scholar who's trying to sort of figure out how to be a scholar, and I think and I like that you talk about it as a journey. It really is a journey, and you kind of develop your own way, and it has to do with I call it predisposition. I think you called it an attitude. I trained as an economist. I mean, I cannot even read or understand my master's thesis and formulas, regression analysis, etc. But the reason why I became who I am is because I felt that all of these formulas that I was using were not helping me to really understand the lived reality of the people I was studying. So then just on my own, I started to learn anthropology. I started to do anthropology, then I got this PhD position. I wasn't really caring about the PhD, but it was just something that would bring me into the villages to speak with the farmers because I was trained as an agricultural economist. And then as you engage more with your population, the people who you are studying, you have this, I think, you just gain this natural compunction to just want to, one, understand better, and two, enter in this relational back and forth. So it's, and then you think, how can I do that? And then each of us sees what is most conducive for what it is that you are. So that's why we have this palette, right? Is because people are developing all these different things, and there is no formula. I mean, I come from development studies, and in development studies, which is probably where participatory research methods were really developed and used a lot, but they've been highly criticized. And I think Lorraine knows all of the discussions that have been, people have written about how you can still be very much ingrained in these huge power relations. So it's not about, oh, let me just use this tool. That's why it's accompanied by a predisposition or an attitude that you develop on your journey.
I think it is my turn now. I really enjoyed hearing all your stories and in a way trying to find out these different ways of people doing engagement. I think Niels spoke very much about, in a way, doing engaged, almost what we call valorization activities, because you made a claim, a passionate claim, plea for opening up the discourse on engagement to be more inclusive, maybe to quantitative researchers, which I mean, inclusion is great. I really heard it, but don't we have the term valorization for that? And isn't that something that is part of WNO, the Dutch Science Council? Like, how do you valorize your research? How do you make impact? So don't we already have a concept for that? But that wasn't necessarily my question. But I also really like, yes, it is a good question. And but it came as a response to what Niels just said. But I do like it that if the discourse of engagement is exclusionary, it's exclusive, then, and limits people from trying to engage more, that would be a shame, I would say. And I also liked how Niels brought in the topic of care and love, or caring about topics to research them. And then Valentina, you really spoke about facilitating voice and bringing also our findings to non-academic audiences, giving back, communicating in a different way. And then Elena, you really spoke about how not to be violent as researchers, this conceptual, trying to bring non-resonating conceptual order and co-creating knowledge in relational learning. And I also really like that Maria brought in some order. There are all these different ways that we can, but in a non-violent way, I would say, of some conceptual order. But what my question is to you all is, we see how these different conceptualizations of engagement are rooted in different methodological backgrounds, or maybe even ontological, epistemological backgrounds, and then the next question would be maybe what can we learn from each other, or how can our considerations from other approaches inform or inspire our practices, and or is this cross-pollination really necessary? Is this something we want to do? And what are the limitations, difficulties, or dilemmas of combining these different approaches? So Valentina, you just said, testing methods, or why is it hard? This is a real question. Why? And I think Nella in our discussions also said it. Why is it so hard to co-create conceptual categories in quantitative research? And that's also something that Niels, maybe I can ask you. Why is it hard to test methods with participants for them to become less violent? That would be a way. What can then quantitative research learn from quantitative co-creative methods? But then also to Elena, what can more the our conceptualization of engagement maybe learn from more quantitative approaches? Or should we not try to do that? Or should we just enjoy the surplus or the value of our own approaches? Who feels most called for to do that? Anybody?
I'll start this. I'll just with some thoughts that come to mind. First of all, I think I love a diversity of methods. So because I just feel that we live in a very complex society. We have complex social issues, and it's a puzzle, and every method gives us a piece of the puzzle if we are open. Right, so even in the predisposition, if we're open to learning from each other. And that is, as someone who, I only work in teams. I've never worked, I co-authored my PhD thesis. So, you know, I've always worked in teams. I co-authored with a soil scientist. So you can imagine, you know, I don't know actually what it means to work by myself, and I'm not sure I would like it, just because I feel every teamwork has always been something that I've learned so much from. But it does mean that you need to be open. And so, and then secondly, I think everyone has you can have a strength, you know, and so when I work in teams, I always try to use the strengths in my team so that they can be, and I work with a development economist, you know, who's done a lot of just quantitative research. But what I find my role as the lead of the team is to facilitate the respectful communication between researchers. And once you set that up, there's so much exchange and learning that happens, and then it just goes on its own. So it needs a lot of like help at the beginning, but then it goes. So I just think that there's so much to be learned from each other. And then I would agree with Niels that if the way we talk about engaged scholarship would somehow be exclusionary of certain types of methods or yeah, then I think we're weakening ourselves. But I do, of course, admit that there are many people who are using, usually yes, people who use quantitative methods might not be predisposed to listening. But that's a measure, again, that's a matter of predisposition. It's not a matter of the method inadequate.
I'm going to agree, if I may,
Okay.
and then add stuff.
Okay.
I fully agree with the different methods, different questions to get the full picture. I fully agree with the let's work together in projects, for instance, and in a way, I think I often take on the same role doing the translation, because I'm actually doing mixed method research quite a lot, and I'm training different methods. I would even tilt that to the sort of disciplinary level, so the people need to connect fields. That doesn't mean we all have to be mixed method scholars, but just like we learn stuff from that, we learn stuff from that. Some people need to do the translation because a lot gets lost in translation, and we need to be open to respectful communication. And then we get to some of the questions that were sort of implicit or explicit. And I really like how you framed it, Tara, like what can quantitative scholars learn from like testing the questionnaires or stuff with qualitative, and I think we can do it. I'm not sure that I share your assumption on finance there. But the second question was, and the other way around, what can qualitative scholars learn from quantitative, if anything at all? And then if I'm going to be a bit like sparring up the discussion, that's an interesting conditioning for what can qualitative scholars learn from quantitative scholars. Well, there was no conditioning, even a normative claim in your question. So maybe that was my interpretation, but I think this needs to be a relational discussion. And I'm not sure whether that's actually going on. And we need people to connect that. And all of us need to be open to that discussion, or at least the people in that sort of network that I now envision that are in between the different fields. And we're not there yet, and it would be a shame, because then going back to the engagement, like even if quantitative scholars don't call themselves engaged scholars while they do engaging stuff, I don't care about the label, to be honest. I really don't. What I do care about is that I see young scholars that actually sort of pull back in not doing the activities because there's a stigma. That's my group. And it doesn't care for my career. Like I have a permanent contract and I'm paid more than enough, so that's fine. But that's what matters to me. So, and I want to break free from that.
Yeah, I think we're a bit short on time. Like I'm getting some looks from Kai. Very intimidating look. Maybe it would be nice to hear if you have thought, Elena, what
very
very shortly,
Yeah,
because
about the
I actually quite agree
Yeah.
with what has been already said. And also there, I mean, it's a question of polyvocality actually, and learning to work together, actually working together, because the reality is we are very much compartmentalized in different methods, different traditions, different disciplines. In our VCT, we talked about polydisciplinary amory or something like that. So really daring to, get beyond these images that we have of, you have your own discipline and your own research group. And in that, there should be the space to be different. And there should be attention to power relations also there, because I think in many contexts, qualitative research is very marginalized, and especially co-creative research and research coming from feminist traditions. So we need to reclaim a space, but there are also contexts where the contrary is going on. So it's, I think, a lot of what we said about co-creating with participants, we should learn to co-create with each other. And and I see a lot of value in this cross-pollination, because with quantitative research, you can answer other types of questions, you can have other types of impacts, you can show things on a different scale. So I think certainly there's a value in that.
I think what you just said points to something that a very important point that Maria made from her research, which is that there's a need to also change the academy. And it's not just about making it more diverse in terms of the inclusive of diversity of people, but also of diversity of approaches and diversity of, so that engaged scholarship or feminist scholarship or, critical theory, whatever, it also gets valued. And I think that the, this whole initiative of rewards and recognition and rewards, I think it's called now at the national level, and each university is implementing it in different ways. But that also gives it's providing some cracks for people like engaged scholars to try to change something.
Yes, indeed. And actually, most of the scholars that I talk to have a very interdisciplinary background themselves, and it sounded often like you described, like they were studying something, but they realized they can't really find the answers here. So they went to different disciplines, and then slowly, they started to get to learn different approaches, and then they built their own sort of engagement. And then indeed, they also tried to change academic structures in terms of doing interdisciplinary work and inspire their own discipline with these other disciplines that they were part of before. I know we only have a little time left, but what I just thought now is that can we actually think of research approaches that go beyond simply sort of adding qualitative and quantitative research approaches sort of in a cycle, like we first qualitative approach, then we do based on that we develop a survey and the survey, and then we again do interviews. Is there something that we could, I mean, there are so many tools nowadays so I just got inspired, like, is there something new? Can we create something new? Or is it really just adding research cycles after each other?
Well, that's a whole.
Another
For the
workshop.
next workshop.
Yeah. Thank you so much for all the input.
Yes. The mic is here. Yes, I think we can go on for ages with discussing our different viewpoints, our different experience with engaged scholarship. But I think it's also great if we can open up the floor with some questions or some comments. We don't have much time left. Unfortunately, we're, as always, running out of time. But I think we have space for, let's say, 2 or maybe 3 questions. Also for the people online who are watching via the live stream, you can put questions in the Q&A. So we also really invite you to engage with us in this discussion. So we have room for 2 or 3 comments or questions. So is there anyone would like to say something or would I see here a finger? Yes.
I hope I'm not taking up too much space, but thank you so much for all the talks, and I already have lots of ideas gained from it for my own research, so that was really great. I was thinking a bit about the giving voice part and also giving voice in academic settings specifically. So I'm struggling myself a little bit with like the power relations as a researcher, studying participants without papers. And sometimes I think like, okay, I'm just writing down these stories and I can gain a PhD from it. And that, sometimes gives an awkward feeling, so to say. So I've been thinking about like co-authorships, co-researching with people from migrant backgrounds, or maybe allowing them to talk in spaces like academic spaces. So I was wondering if you had any ideas like on how to give voice within more the academic setting, so to say. So because it is so fraught with power relations and it's difficult, it's sort of an inaccessible institution. So that's my
question. Well, I think that is the core idea is about reciprocity, right? How to give back. And I would say that I would really make that a relational learning process of how to, what can you give back that people really want? So if it is co-authorship, then, I mean, people might not have academic aspirations, or they might indeed have academic. So it is really trying to find something that you can do together that feels rewarding to all. And so I was talking about, we were speaking about creating institutional access to education for undocumented youth, but there are many ways, right? I remember in my own PhD, very similar to Valentina, I made a documentary film with the people I work with, also in a way to communicate in different ways, to have a different message that wasn't so conceptually oriented. And then I was also constantly wondering whether I gave enough, whether I wasn't benefiting myself too much, like all these ethical questions. So I would say, I don't know, try to find a way together that feels rewarding to all. And I do know that in itself, academia can be, or even just a building can be quite off-putting. That is, I know from more participatory approaches that actually opening up the physical space to people is in itself unsettling or counter-hegemonic, or which is really inspiring. But it could also be that that totally doesn't fit people's desires or needs, and that you can find different ways that they actually, like creating a theater together, or like Niels said, trying to influence the policy in an effective manner, which can be far more important in a way than creating a conceptual category, if that, I don't know if anybody, Look at, so go for it.
Great. I also saw a hand over there in the back, and we also have a question online, and then I would like to give Lorraine the floor also to raise her question. So actually we have 4. But first, Lena, please go ahead.
Yes, it was really interesting to hear, but I'm wondering if it's also possible to critically reflect a bit on cooperation and what are the limits and what are still the power relations that are still in place. What sense do we still reproduce power relations?
Sorry, can you speak a little bit louder, because I have a cold and I don't hear very well. I'm sorry.
In what sense do we still reproduce power relations, even if we might not want that, or if we might not aim for that, but in the end, like, researchers are the ones being paid, and the research participants are not being paid, for instance. And most of the times, maybe the research group is involved in some steps, but the big decisions, like also the topic of the research, is still defined by the researcher. So I think that's a little bit related to like the critical reflection of the whole system, like how can we change that?
Shall I address it? Yeah, very important question and also layered. I think it connects partly also to what Tara was saying. And this reciprocity can have many different shapes, and it's, I think, very important to reflect not only on what you learn from each other and what you bring to each other in terms of learning, but as Fabian also reminds us always in the research group, it's also a critical reflection on the resources also, who benefits also in terms of resources from research. And indeed, I often, not so much in the research with Refugee Academy, but in research I do in the youth domain, I really often get this question like, yeah, but you get paid for this, you know? Do you get paid for this? So it's really searching for ways to balance that in different ways that you can give back. And sometimes it can be in financial ways. You can find ways to compensate people financially when, you know, in some contexts that really makes sense because you are doing something, you're producing something together. And I think actually, yeah, Fabian, maybe you also want to say something, because you have a very beautiful example, I think, of how in situations, in a situation where the power disbalance can be very high, you created something really beautiful that benefited many people. There was something else I wanted to say, but I forgot. But maybe, I don't know, do you want to?
Sure.
If you have time.
Well, try to put it very briefly, but yeah, I was working with the queer refugee community organizers, and basically after been engaging with them for 2 years and with different people, we came up sort of collaboratively to have workshop series, but also given by people from the community. So they got paid to give a workshop basically. And then through these workshops, we created a safer space. And in this workshop, we created content like creative content or artworks. And this we put in an exhibition, so we made that in a room. So we made the safer space public to share, the stories, the narratives. So this is very, very briefly. So this is a way to also compensate. And then there were also performers for the opening, so they got paid as well. But yeah, this is, and we tried, and it's also a collaboration with the art institution. So the research, or my research, is basically how can it benefit everyone? So the art institution, the community, and the university. So.
And I also thought you said at the end, you decide what is the topic, but you can have that more radically inclusive. You can really say, let's co-create the question, let's co-create the design. If then we need to get other researchers in beyond my expertise, even though that is, I think, a really difficult process, because as a researcher, you also have an expertise of knowing how to formulate a question or knowing what might resonate with funders, or but I do think you can have that co-creation a lot broader than also conceptually, but also in research design. You can also experiment with that. No? Yeah.
So I mean, there is no power-free space, so there will always be hierarchies, which also entails that sometimes your participants might be in a more powerful position than you yourself in certain spaces, maybe, you know. So I think it's also important to also acknowledge the agency of participants themselves, which also includes what you said, that it's just including participants in your research doesn't necessarily mean that you will challenge discourses, because they might be normalized by discourses as well. So it's important that actually everyone involved in the research is reflective about power relations, and that you have a dialogue about it.
But in terms of, you know, thinking about the limits and being critical also, I think I was actually in one of my projects, I had to co-create. I was forced to co-create. So I had all these local participants, and I had, you know, local NGOs from Ghana, and we had a whole 3-day workshop in Ghana, paid lots of money for it, etc. That's okay. I had it, you know, from the funder, because I think there is the issue of the funding. But then when we got to the question, it was all about, you know, again, I was doing transnational families and children of migrant parents, and they were all talking about trafficked children and orphans, and they really wanted to do all this research on that. And I was like, well, okay, but this is what you hear about in the media, and you think this is huge and it's important,
but there's an even bigger population of just, kids who have migrant parents and who actually are doing okay because their parents are paying for the very high school fees, etc. So getting to a research question that was actually worthy of being researched and could be submitted to an NWO and win and get the funding in a co-creative workshop was a hell of a job. And in the end, I did include some of the things that they said, but the research question ultimately remained about these children and not the orphans and not the trafficked children. So there I put, I sort of put my foot down. And that's also what you were saying is everyone comes around the table, but ultimately I'm the one submitting the proposal to the Dutch National Science Foundation. So I had more power to ultimately put a veto on certain things. And I do think that that's important to mention because sometimes co-creation sounds so beautiful. And I think that the big two things I showed you were beautiful, and that's why I brought them up. But there's a lot of other less beautiful, more to important to acknowledge.
Yes, great. I think we can go to the question that was raised on Zoom. I'm not sure. I'm looking to fathom if you can make the person like unmute themselves.
Yes.
Wow, this is strange. Now I'll be the God in the room. Do you hear me?
Talk? No, we can't hear you.
Do you hear
Okay, we cannot hear you. Maybe she said it doesn't matter. I can ask it, or you can. So, like, we can't hear you. Sorry. I will ask the question for you.
So I unmute myself.
Questions. Wait. First of all, so Elena, first of all, thank you all for this inspiring workshop. Maybe to create a moment of promotion, does engaged scholarship lead to an alternative form of knowledge production? Can you tell us about your articles where your empirical work was shaped by engaged scholarship practices?
Whoa.
I can do a short answer. In a way, I think all of them, but that links to what you just said, because the topics and the questions I ask are grounded in sort of talking with people. And in my definition of engaged scholarship, like they come from that in a way, even though they're like really dry statistical pieces, the question comes from somewhere.
Okay, short. Also, I feel that we designed a survey expressly to move beyond categories of first generation, second generation. So, and why was this? Because we observed amongst the young people that there were other categories that were of relevance to them, but no surveys were collecting information on that. So now we're writing up our research, and I would say that this is an example of where, inspired by what was happening on the ground, we developed a survey instrument that was asking, let's say atypical questions, and now we're experimenting with seeing whether other categories make sense or show us things that we couldn't see using the previous categories.
Want me also to give an example?
There is one more question. Yeah, if you want, there's one
Very briefly.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I think one example is which is maybe also a bit atypical, a theoretical article that I'm writing that's not part of the Refugee Academy work, but the other side of my work in the methodological realm. And that is, it's a theoretical article, but it was actually, this theoretical framework emerged through the co-creation with professionals and youngsters. So like the concepts, for instance, concept of professional intimacy, or the role of conviviality, the role of, also there we use actually decentering and recentering, but then in the role of professionals towards families. So these are all actually, it's theoretical terms, but they are rooted in the experiences of the participants. So in that sense, that's also a product of co-creation.
There's somebody that really would like to ask questions.
But we're really running out of time. I'm not sure if it's related to what we just discussed, but also we can engage with your question in the after talk during the drinks.
Well, it's very different than anything anybody else does.
But then maybe discuss it during the drinks. I'm very sure.
What about if they both ask their question and we don't answer?
Yeah.
Just so that we hear the
Yeah,
question.
yes,
I'll be very brief.
Great solution. Very briefly.
So I keep thinking about the comment that you made about the person from the deportation officer having an unexpected reaction to the play that you provided. And I was curious because I've worked with a lot of policymakers and organizations in the United States, and I've seen this also happen where people kind of take your work and don't necessarily do what you expect with it. So I was curious if there were any other examples and how you navigated that to kind of make sure that the voices are being received in a way that is appropriate to your work.
A very good question.
We said we weren't going to answer the question.
During the drinks, you can.
During the drink.
Yes, please, if your answer for during the drink, great. Then Lorraine, yours.
Someone else. I can talk later.
Then maybe two sentences for you.
Yes.
Valentina?
Well, it's not a question, it's a comment.
Well, good. I can be a critical comment. That's
Well,
gonna
okay,
be
I've got several.
First.
Great, very briefly, Lorraine.
I can read. Firstly, I have had an experience, maybe because I'm qualitative and I can't do survey, where we did a survey in our research, and the first thing we did was sit down with our consortium partners who are organizations and people from there and work on the questions together after we designed that. And it was a beautiful experience, really a beautiful experience. We learned a lot. Secondly, I very often, when I use, and I think you'll agree with me with this, is when I use engaged scholarship, one of the first things I say, it's a matter of respecting each other's expertise. Because we have this problem of thinking, very often we're inclined to think of it as almost it's reciprocal, but we talk about it more as a one-way thing to make sure that other people are included. But as you also said, when you put your foot down, there's a certain sort of expertise and knowledge that you have that makes it possible to get that money, for example, that other people don't. So I think that's also part of engaged scholarship. And the third thing is about change, but I can't go into that. I've become very humbled about change and what it means. And it doesn't mean that I'm less engaged, and it doesn't mean that I'm less, and I am political about my work, but I don't expect much. I don't even expect that much from participants anymore. Yeah, it depends. No, and not in a negative way, not in a negative way. In a realistic way that people have other priorities and they like what they're doing with us, but it doesn't mean it leads to anything, right? But that's a story in itself. Thank you.
Great. I think it's time to wrap up the Q&A or the discussion that we are having. I wish we could have stayed here like 2, 3, 4, 5 hours longer. But we'll definitely come together again to discuss also the questions that were not raised. But now I really would like to go to the final part of this session, this event. And I would like to give the floor to Halleh Ghorashi, because when we here at Vrije Universiteit are talking about engaged scholarship, we cannot leave Halleh's name out of the discussion. I will keep the introduction very short, very briefly, but I still wanted to say that she was last year awarded the ICSA Impact Award for the impact that her decade-long research has made in society. So please give a big hand for Halleh Ghorashi for a final reflection.
To have a talk now, and knowing that you have been sitting for 2 hours, for the last 10 minutes, somewhat reciprocity was there, but it was standing from our side with beautiful thoughts. So the question to you is, can you bear with me 10 minutes?
I think
we can also go for a drink and come back and
no.
Just go. Okay, so then thank you so much for your presence, your thoughts, very enriching. I just want to share you my journey because there has been a lot of discussion already, and Maria and Elena already presented what I would like to say also, because it is our research project together. But just start with the journey, why, how I became or interested in engaged scholarship. I'm born in Iran. I was born in Iran. I was a revolutionary there. I was part of the revolution as a Marxist activist. And if you remember Iranian Revolution, some of you were not born then, 1979. Then I was a 17 years old girl, very active in the revolution. And then we were going to the university, which were taken over by revolutionaries. And there was this 8th of March celebration. And then there was this very famous historian, female historian, who gave a talk. She was an activist, she was a feminist, but also very respected historian. And she was talking about gender diversity, not so much diversity, gender inclusion, gender equality. And I was in the audience, there were 3,000 people there. And I thought, my God, I want to be her. But then again, I was also a bit struggled because I wanted to be a partisan, somebody who fights and, against injustice. So I was puzzled at that time. But engaged scholarship was for me that, combining action and scholarship. So I became a refugee in '88, came to the Netherlands. So you can imagine the images of refugees not being so deficiency taught, not being that talented, not being having qualities, not being that having added value to our society. So I thought, engagement, I can do something with it, but scholarship, no. So the dream was gone, I thought. But at some point, I started doing my academic work. I started as anthropologist first. And I thought, if I want to do research with my PhD, what would be interesting to do? I was, in a way, good in numbers. And for me, the mixed methods was first something I thought about. But at some point, I realized what is missing in the public debate is actually the stories and perspectives of refugees themselves. Because I see all these categories, all these numbers, all these percentages about refugees with good intentions sometimes, because the high level of unemployment, we want to include them, but then the numbers and the categories were creating similar stories about refugees. And I thought, where is this polyfocality? Where is this voice? Where is the perspective? So I thought I want to do narrative research. For me, narrative research became a way of giving voice. Later, I thought you can collect all the narratives, but if you do not connect with policymakers or other researchers, what do you do with narratives? Mm-hmm. So we created spaces for engagement in which we brought several perspectives together, but again, with this idea of right meal, sociological imagination, we as sociologists and anthropologists, social scientists, have a role in enlarging the societal imagination of the society. That was at that time the goal, bringing knowledge into this space of co-creation. Later I thought, okay, but what is real engaged scholarship for me, and that was my development, is actually unsettling the power position of academia, because I was hearing all the time, if you look around you, who are the people who are changing the societies are not sociologists, are not social scientists, are people like Frans Fanon, André Lord, or Al-Sadawi, all these people, Steve Biko, but not sociologists. So, and then I went to Japan. There was this international conference of International Sociological Association. And then I heard, at that time, the president, who was, what's the name? Michael Borwai. And he talked about sociology. He said, inequality is our topic of sociology. look around you and who has influence in society, in global scene when we talk about inequality. At that time, it was Piketty, not a sociologist, and Pope Francis, not a sociologist either. So where are the sociologists, he asked. And I thought, yes, because, and one of the reasons maybe is that we do not leave our ivory tower, I thought. So we have to unsettle and discuss these power relations and the fact that if we engage, we only send, we do not learn from society, not enough. So that's why for me, the next step was to unsettle and challenge my own position, decenter myself. And in doing that, creating space, equal possibilities, although very difficult, for engagement. Decenter yourself, take yourself out of the equation to be equal. But then again, the next challenge was, what is my role that don't have all the studies I have done, all the things I have learned, I have anything to bring into the equation? So recenter me. So that was the thing I was thinking, that is engagement. Very thick approach, very, I would say in that hierarchical thinking, I had my own hierarchical development in thinking about engaged scholarship. So narratives, collective narratives, giving voice, good, but not enough. Engaging, bringing knowledge to society, very good, not enough. Challenging yourself as a scholar, maybe enough. And then I went and was invited to give a lecture at UvA, University of Amsterdam, for Day of Sociology in 2019. And I told this story. And then there was this very famous quantitative professor at the oh, I'm so surprised with your story because you only talk about impact and engagement from a qualitative approach, but I am a quantitative sociologist and I think I have impact and I think I'm engaged. So about the impact side, I thought, okay, yes, of course, quantitative sociologists have impact. What kind of impact I was doubting. But again, but when he said I am engaged, I thought, oh, that was really, I was unsettled because I thought I have a bias. I have a bias about, then today, Niels' story shows my bias, because the point is that engagement can be so different. And if we define engagement the way I just did in my journey, you close the doors. And what we learned from Engaged Scholarship Project, which I have to say, talking about marginalization, when you get a Vichy grant called Engaged Scholarship and Narratives of Change in Netherlands, you're not marginalized anymore. So which is something which is happening as well, I want to share, to me as well, but also to the research community in the Netherlands. That when you define it so close, so thick, you do not create space for collaborations or co-creation with other academics. So and I'm so happy that Nella brought this. We were already discussing. We had discussions in our group, but you coming asking us, I want to do that because I want to know more about engaged scholarships as a mixed method researcher, quantitative researcher, and I want to also see what are the possibilities. And having you here presenting your work already creates this differentiation we need. Actually, that's the start, I would say. Differentiate and also be very reflective about our own biases, to create more connections and to create co-creation also in academia, so that we are much more vulnerable towards our own positioning and also our own biases. And I think this seminar has been a very, very nice example of how we can enjoy, learn from each other and create co-creation in academia. So a kind of engagement, which is necessary for all of us to be inspired, because I am really inspired by all of you. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much for that. I'm sure your head is spinning with thoughts and you have this need to stand up. It's also quite warm here, or is that me?
No,
Yeah.
it's not you.
Okay, okay. So I was thinking, with respect to being reflective, we first called this a workshop. And then when we started making the program, we realized we had too many things we wanted to share and too many speakers we wanted to invite. So now Kai and I every time we say workshop, we say, no, event. But for me, this is at least a reflection of like that I realize we ask a lot of you by staying seated so long. So thank you for bearing with us. And I just wanted to ask the very same question I asked you more than 2 hours ago. Do you consider yourself an English scholar? Absolutely, no more hands.
But that's because your question is do, not who.
Do you consider yourself to be an engaged scholar? Of course, again in the chat, I didn't keep track, but I think at least I hope we had enough food for thought to ask ourselves whether we are, whether we want to be, or whether we can be in certain areas for certain places. Thank you at least for all the input. Thank you so much to all the speakers. I'll also continue my journey on the engaged scholarship train. So my next project also as part of the grant is to co-create with high-skilled migrants on what policies can do for them, or should they do anything to increase them feeling at home in the Netherlands. And I hope it gave you some food for thought too. Please stay for drinks. To those of you who stayed online, thank you so much. And I hope our paths cross elsewhere. Thank you to the Refugee Academy for coordinating this with me. It was really a great experience for me. Thank you, Halleh, Tara, Elena, Maria, and Kai for all the input and discussion and the program we put together. Thank you, Valentina and Niels, for speaking as well. Thank you, Fabian, for taking care of the online community today. And yeah, let's get a drink. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Thank you.